What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Bobby D. Welcome to the Sticks and Beers podcast. Tonight is a special one-off episode. It's just myself on the podcast tonight because I am joined with Shawn Roarke of NHL.com. Him and I had an awesome conversation on his 5 favorite moves of the offseason, but also his 5 favorite beers of the summer so far. Shawn is a big beer advocate, big craft beer guy himself. And we get into an awesome, about an hour-length conversation about the summer trades, signings, moves, and also beers of the summer. Again, just want to give a quick shout-out to Coach Tony's Hot Sauce. Thank you for everything that you guys do. Also to our good buddy Kendrick at KNRC Productions for putting together the new Sticks and Beers intro. Sounds fantastic. If you guys didn't listen, rewind it, go listen again. And here is my interview with Shawn Roarke of NHL.com. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Sticks and Beers podcast. This is your boy, Bobby D. Tonight, I am riding solo, but I am thankfully joined with Shawn Roarke of NHL.com. He's the Director of Editorial. Shawn, thanks for joining the podcast. You are our first really, big guest, and I'm very thankful to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks a lot. They say you never forget your first, so I hope that ends up being true. I'm really happy to be on. Bobby reached out to me at NHL.com. I cover a lot of hockey, obviously, get to travel a fair bit, and one of the regular gigs I have is I go on Sirius XM NHL radio with Rob Simpson and Gord Stellick in the mornings, and I don't even remember how it started, but about a year and a half ago, we started doing beer recommendations. Rob Simpson asking me what I was drinking and what I enjoyed, and very recently, Rob put out the list for this season, and it ended up being pretty much a case of beer, all different beers, and Bobby reached out to me, obviously being into hockey and being into beer, and said, what a perfect match for my podcast. Let's make this happen. So here we are.
It's absolutely incredible. It literally is a match made in heaven. So for our listeners at home, why don't you say what you do at NHL.com for us, and maybe a little bit how you got to where you are, and then we'll jump into our conversation at hand after that.
Sure. So the Cliff Notes version of who I am and how I got to where I am, I'll start at the beginning. I grew up in Rhode Island, the smallest state in the Union, and obviously loved hockey from the time I was a little kid. Played until I was 17, was a goalie, and that probably explains a lot. But then I went to your neck of the woods and went to Syracuse for college. Wanted to study broadcast journalism. They got a hold of my Rhode Island accent, which is even worse than a Boston accent, and they said, maybe you should think about another career. So I went into print journalism, and then when I graduated, I was lucky enough to have a friend who I had done journalism school with recommend me for a job in New Jersey, and I moved to New Jersey, and I actually started out in the newspaper business at 21 years old, doing obituaries, writing up stories about people that had died and the funeral homes had called in, and picking one each day that was interesting and having to call the family and kind of get the details and write a nice going away story, so to speak. And for in the old days when they actually did obituaries and they weren't computer generated or paid for, that was kind of the proving ground for anybody that wanted to be a journalist. The thought process was, if you could call a grieving family member and get a good story about somebody who had passed away, then you could ask a goalie why he let up a goal, or you could ask a town councilman why he voted a certain way on a certain bill. And that was pretty much the test that you had to pass, along with going to get coffee and dry cleaning and all the other things that you have to do. So I spent 5 years there, great years. Moved from obituaries to local sports, covered high school football. In 1994, I got the New Jersey Devils and New York Rangers beat doing whoever was home. Kind of had to work it around my high school football schedule and then my high school wrestling schedule. But I didn't know anybody in New Jersey, or very few people outside of the newspaper, so I pretty much did it on my own free time. But for those of you who have been following hockey long enough or have a sense of history, 1994 was the year that the Rangers won their first cup since 1940. So that wasn't a bad year to start. And they played the Devils in the Eastern Conference Final, one of the best series I've seen to this point in my career. And then in 95, the Devils won the cup. In the shortened season, they swept Detroit in 4 games, a huge upset. And I thought that I was going to go to the Stanley Cup Final every year, and clearly that did not happen. And then in 97, I think it was, I went to Fox Sports as they were starting up their website. Had dreams of challenging ESPN.com. They had Fox Sports Plus at the time, which was a lot of English soccer before they had Fox Soccer. A lot of rugby, Tour de France, other European football. And I did a little bit of that and a little bit of hockey. And then in 2000, several of the people I had worked with Fox at went to the NHL. And again, I was lucky enough to have somebody have faith in me and bring me along. And I started there in 2000, and I've done everything there from being production and putting stuff up on the web to being a writer where we only wrote 1 story a week because the site only updated twice a day, to being the senior writer, to now I'm director of editorial. And in that capacity, I still do a bit of writing, and I also do long-term planning for our staff, which is 10 full-time writers, and we have a correspondent in every market except for the 4 near our office in New York. So 26 correspondents plus an analytics guy and a goaltending specialist, and an AHL guy. So we're right around 30 correspondents. So I do a lot of planning on week-to-week features and how we're going to cover things like outdoor games, European games. We're playing in China again this year, so how we would cover that, and then Stanley Cup Finals and things like that. And fortunately, I'm still lucky enough to go to a good number of those high visibility games, and it allows me to travel a little bit, see the world, and experience new stuff. So that's kind of the cliff notes of who I am and how I got to where I am.
That is extensive and awesome. I personally am a New Jersey Devils fan, even though I'm from Rochester, New York. Growing up, when Brian Giunta was a rookie for the Devils and the Devils won the Stanley Cup, his younger brother Joe, the one that's actually in the middle of him and Steven, that actually never made a career out of playing hockey, was my travel coach when Brian won the Stanley Cup, and he brought it back here to Rochester, and my entire travel team got to take pictures with Brian and the actual cup, not the replica one, at the Hall of Fame. So that was a special time for me, and that's why I am the most biased New Jersey Devils fan, probably on Twitter, and I'm proud of it.
Well, that's good. It's good to have a passion, but now I have an important question for you. Actually, a 2-part question.
Okay.
1, did you touch it?
No.
All right, then 2, I already know the answer to. You didn't drink out of it.
No, I was 11 years old, I think, when they won
Well,
it.
you could have had some pop out of it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I don't think Brian was letting us, to be honest.
You could have had chocolate milk, right?
Yeah.
But, yeah, no, I'm always interested when people are around the cup, if they touch it or not. I didn't for years. When the Devils won in 95, I didn't touch the cup when I was in the locker room after it was over. Because at the time I still had dreams that I was going to be involved in some way and actually win it myself, not playing, but management or whatever. I'm pretty settled in the journalism business now, and I don't think I'm ever going to be a GM in the NHL, so I might have touched it once or twice in the more recent times.
So now, Shawn, since you're on the podcast, you can be completely honest. Do you root, or do you have a favorite team, or do you just root for good stories now?
To be honest with you, I root for good stories. When I was a kid, I was the biggest Bruins fan there was. I loved Terry O'Reilly. I loved Cam Neely. I was 3 or 4 years old when Bobby Orr quit playing hockey. Well, I was 4 years old when they won their second cup, the Bruins. And, so I don't remember that. I've grown up on the legend of Bobby Orr, and I've seen all the videos, not just the cup winning goal, but, a guy that completely revolutionized the game. So, but, before I went to college, I started to lose my love of the Bruins, and then I moved to Jersey. There were a lot of Rhode Island guys in Jersey. Lou Lamoriello ran the team. Chris Terreri was the goaltender. David Emma played for them, so they had a pretty good Rhode Island connection. And I kind of started to like them a little bit. But then once I started covering the NHL as a job, you lose that very quickly. I'll tell you the two things I root for. I root for good stories, long series, double overtimes, whatever it is in the playoffs. And I root for people, right? I mean, you meet all kinds of people in whatever job you do. You like some of them, you don't like others. And when people that you like that have been good to you and treated you in a way that you would like to treat other people, you want to see them do well, and it's good. Those tend to be good stories. So I really do root for good stories. I always joke with family and friends when they ask me, it's like having 31 children and loving each one of them equally. I don't know if you really do love all your children equally. I do, but I know some people have favorites, but that's what it's like for me.
Well, speaking of good stories, the reason why I have you on the podcast tonight is to pick your brain about your favorite 5 beers of the summer so far, and also what you think have been the 5 best moves of the off season. Now, to me, this can be free agents signing to new teams, free agents signing with their same team, they're just re-signing, or trades, or coaches going somewhere, management, you name it. A move is a move. So your favorite beers of the summer so far, and what you think the 5 best moves of the off season so far. So you do one, and then I will give my opinion on what I think is one as well.
Okay, so we're doing players first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I'm going to loop them all into one. I really like what the Blues have done this summer. I guess that's cheating a little bit. If I had to pick one, it's probably the Ryan O'Reilly trade. And you probably know this, being in Rochester and Buffalo being the dominant team that you see all the time. Like, I just feel like he had gone kind of stale there in Buffalo. It was a tough position he was in, where they weren't being successful. And now I see him going to a team that didn't make the playoffs last year, but that's not who they are. They're a pretty competitive team, and the other moves that they made, I think, have set them up to be competitive again. And I'm really excited to see kind of what he can do, what Tyler Bozak can do from the Toronto Maple Leafs. And, they just added Pat Maroon. I don't want to give away what day we're taping on here, but added Pat Maroon today, so any detectives can go and figure out which day this is being taped on, and some other pieces. And I think they're going to be really, really good this year, and they're going to have to be, because the Central it's a minefield, right? You got Nashville, who had the best record in the league. You got Winnipeg, who beat them in the playoffs and had the second best record in the league. And then you got some teams that you wonder where they're going to be. Is Minnesota going to be better? Are they going to be worse? Can Chicago be as bad as they were last year? I don't think so. I think they're going to be better. A lot of that's going to depend on Corey Crawford. But I think that Doug Armstrong has set himself up with the moves that he's made to have a say in what happens in that division.
I mean, you spoke very highly of Ryan O'Reilly going to St. Louis there, and I agree with everything you said. But what do you think about the return that Buffalo got? Do you think they sort of got a little, not gypped, but I know they were going for a culture change, and that's exactly what they went for in that trade. But what's your opinion on Buffalo's return on that?
Well, look, I think what they need to do, what Buffalo needs to do, and I don't know that Sabres fans want to hear this, is this isn't going to happen overnight, right? Like, there's going to be a couple of years of pain here involved to get back to where you want to do what you want to do. I think they got a couple of picks which are really going to help them if they can hit on them. And I like what Botterill's doing, the GM there. I think he's going to have a decent track record when it comes to picks when you look 4 or 5 years down the road. You look at a team like Toronto, and they're nothing like what they were 3 years ago. Like, you can't recognize the team. If you go back and look at Toronto's roster from 3 years ago, when guys like Peter Holland were playing for them, and Arcabello, and names that you don't even think about anymore, to where they are today, whereas Vegas has them as the number 2 favorite to win the Stanley Cup. It's stunning, how fast that happens. You get a generational player like Austin Matthews, and Buffalo has that in Darlene, and you have to hit on some picks. and you have to make some free agent signings. So, I think the picks are going to help them for sure. I really like Tage Thompson. He's a nice young player. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He didn't think that St. Louis gave him the respect that he deserved. He didn't feel like he could play for them because he would make some mistakes as a young player, and they weren't about that. I think in Buffalo, he's going to be able to find his way. And Sabatka and Berglund are serviceable NHL players. You're going to need some guys to kind of be in the trenches, like I said, until Middlestat and all of these players that they've kind of built around or are hoping to build around can come to their own. You need some guys that kind of can show the way. And Ryan was one of those guys, but like I said, the comments at the end of last year pretty much sealed his fate in that, he had come to accept losing and he had lost for the game and all of those things. I don't know how you can survive that as a team once a guy comes out and says that. So, they've completely changed their culture. Robin Lehner's gone. A lot of players are gone from that Buffalo team, and I'm excited to see not what they do this year, but 2 and 3 years from now where they are.
I completely agree. And reading some of the tweets from your colleague Mike Morial from the Devils development camp, Fabian Zetterlund, one of the young Swedes in the Devils system, was just absolutely pumping the tires of Dahlin today because they were asking him in his little media session, and he says he's going to be the best player in the world. It's only going to be a matter of time. So that's one thing. I'm like an honorary Sabres fan just because it's so close to home, and seeing them struggle for so long now after growing up with them being President Trophy winners and being perennial contenders almost year in and year out there in the middle 2000s. So I'm ready for them to get back, because when Buffalo has the Sabres rolling, then man, that is a fun city. But
it's a fun city all the time. It's unbelievable how they support that team and how they support the Bills, and the passion that they have for the team, even when they're down. But the one thing I'll say about Dahlin is he has an opportunity to be a really special player, best in the world. I think that's a pretty tough class to break into. He could do it someday. I look at Victor Hedman, and that's what I see when I see Rasmus Dahlin. He's more talented, but I think it takes a little while. It took Victor Hedman a little while. I think if you're the Sabres, you settle for best defenseman, and that's still a pretty good hill to climb. You got Erik Karlsson, you got Hedman, you got Drew Doughty, who I think is the best right now, and I know some people will fight me over that. But I think Drew is unbelievable. But I think that Dahlin can be, in that conversation sooner rather than later. And I'll tell you what, he's got two really good defensive guys to lead him to where he's going. Phil Housley was a hell of a defenseman when he played, and they just got Steve Smith, who is famous for some of the infamy that was involved in scoring an own goal and all those things. But people forget he was a really, really good defenseman on some really good Edmonton Oilers teams, and understands what it's like to be an elite player and what it takes. So he's going to have some mentors that are going to get him to where he needs to go.
I'm excited. He was one of my 5 off-season moves, so that cancels that one out. So
let's not forget the other thing that's going to happen because of this is Risto Ristolainen is going to not be the number one guy anymore.
Yep.
And going to slot down where he belongs. And that kid's a good defenseman. He's been beat up for the last couple of years because he's been thrown into the deep end. He hasn't had a ton of help, and he's just trying to survive. And if you can, if Dahlin's is good, and by the way, it's Rasmus, not Risto. Risto is the old Edmonton Oiler. I got my Linens confused, but if you can match him up against 2s instead of 1s, I think you're going to see a far different player. Like I really think that kid's a good player, and he needed some protection, and hopefully he's going to find it, and he can find his way to where he belongs as a 2 or a 3.
So, what's one of your favorite beers of the summer so far? Doesn't have to be a summer beer, but just one of your favorite ones that you've had so far this summer.
Well, one of the beers that I've had is the really good craft beer store near me. This beer is so good that they limit what you can buy of it. So it's good when you go in there and the guy's like, I'm sorry, you can only have 1 6-pack. And it's a brewery out of Utah called Epic Brewing, and they do a New England-style IPA. which I like all IPAs, but the New England style's really grown on me, and it's called Pulp Addiction IPA, and it's fantastic.
New England style IPAs, the unfiltered, hazy. That's the trend going on lately. And one of my favorite ones is, well, I think my favorite brewery is Lord Hobo Brewing out of Boston there. And they just released their double IPA Virtuoso, which I had a 4-pack of a couple weekends ago. And that was amazing. That's one of my favorite beers so far. But I do have a couple New England style on my list here. So
yeah, well, I'll definitely have to check that out next time I go home to Rhode Island, and then check out some of their beers. I have not had anything from them yet.
Oh, I highly suggest it. I have bought a lot of swag and tweeted a lot of pictures to them trying to score sponsorship. That would be amazing.
There you go.
Okay, so what is your second biggest move of the offseason so far, even though you packaged a few together?
Look, whenever you get the best player, right, in free agency, that's a good move. You can argue about the price, but I think John Tavares to Toronto, accelerates what they're doing. I think they've paid a lot for him. I don't know that he's as elite as people would suggest he is, and what the money suggests he is, but he's going to help that team. Again, it's all about protecting people and finding the places where people belong. And you look at like a team like Pittsburgh, who's been so good for so long, or San Jose, who's been good for a long period of time. And what's the thing that they have in common? They have 3 really good centers, right? And that's how they win. That's how they outlast teams, because the matchups become impossible. Most teams only have 3 good defensemen. You're lucky if you can go 4 deep. Nashville goes 5 deep, and that's why they were able to give Pittsburgh a bit of a run, when they played in the final. But most teams only go 3 deep with really good defensemen, and most teams can't match a third really good line, right? So, and now Toronto has, whichever way you want to line them up, right? If you want to make Austin Matthews your number 1 guy, and he's going to be your Sidney Crosby, he's going to be your Malkin, and he's going to get all of the prime offensive assignments, and he's going to go that way. Then you got Tavares, who can certainly handle the number 2 job that Crosby handles, where it's more of a straight matchup. It doesn't matter what zone you're in. He's going to be able to play defense for you. And then you look at the number 3, and you got Kadri, and I would put him up against, like, the Penguins right now have Brassard, right? To me, they're equal players. So, I think Toronto still has to find an answer on defense. Kyle Dubas, the new GM there, hasn't made too many wrong moves since he's gotten there. So I'm not going to bet against him and somehow taking a little bit of surplus that he has. Let's not forget they won the Calder Cup as AHL champions, and that team was loaded with prospects. So, he has some ammunition to trade with, but they're going to need some defense, and they need a second goalie, right? I think that Frederick Anderson has worn down each couple of years, so there's still some holes there. I don't think they're the number 2 favorite like Vegas does. I think that's more because that's such a big fan base, and there's going to be a lot of action on it. I think that's where that comes from. But they're going to be better than they were last year. They're going to challenge, for a lot of things. Unfortunately, they're in the Atlantic Division with Tampa Bay and with Boston, both of whom were very good last year and have the possibility of getting better. So, but I think John Tavares was the best player available, and Toronto scored the coup in getting him. I mean, a lot of people thought he was going to stay in New York with the Islanders, and if he didn't do that, a lot of people thought he was going to go to San Jose, where they cleared up a lot of cap room to make room for him, and he ended up in Toronto, who were kind of the dark horses there.
I had JT on my list as well, obviously. Someone would be stupid not to have him on their top 5 moves of the offseason, and I've always been a big JT fan since he's coming to the league, and I think he could put up 85, 90 points easy next season with Toronto, just with what he's been able to do with the Islanders and turn some guys like Matt Molson and Kyle Okposo into just get them paid, basically. I mean, it's ironic that both of them are on Buffalo's salary now, but that's another story. But what about another beer?
So I'll stay in New England since we're in New England, and I was lucky enough when I was in DC for the final with the Caps. I covered Vegas from the second round on, the end of the second round on, and then when we got to the finals, I was able to finally get back east for the games in DC. And for years, one of the things that was on my bucket list was to go to the Church Key, which is one of the more famous beer bars they have in downtown DC. I was finally able to get there one night, and unbelievably, because I've never seen it anywhere except in Vermont when I've been there or buddies have come back, they had Lawson's finest Sip of Sunshine on tap.
Oh, my gosh.
Almost unheard of. I almost did a dance right there at the bar when I saw it. I said, "You really have this on tap?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." It almost modified the anger that I had that they didn't have anything on cask, which I love more than anything. But they were out at that point, and so I was looking for another option. And when I came across that, I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" And it was as excited as I am now talking about it. It was even better on the night that I had it. Like I said, I've seen buddies bring it back. You know, I live in Jersey now. I have a buddy that goes every 3 weeks or so, drives up to Vermont. Clearly, he's not married. He doesn't have kids like myself, but every 3 weeks or so, he takes the weekend. He drives up there, makes a weekend out of it, and comes back with as much as he's allowed to carry back. And because he's a good friend, every once in a while, I get one can. So to have it on tap was fantastic.
Well, speaking of Vermont, I have a Vermont brewery on my list as well. From Tunbridge, Vermont, out of the Upper Pass Beer Company, is First Drop. It is an American Pale Ale, and there's just a craft beer store right around the corner from my house that is probably the size of my basement, but it has arguably the best selection here in Rochester, in my opinion, pound for pound. And I one day just walked in there, and they were just selling single cans, so I had to pick one up. Suggested from the worker guy, and this is hands down one of my most favorite beers. First Drop from Upper Pass Beer Company, delicious. They go out of stock fast, but I think that has more to do with me living in Rochester and them being in Vermont. But I highly suggest that to anyone.
So you got to keep quiet about it.
Yeah, it's true.
See, you just gave it away to everybody. One of the keys, and you never want to do that, is when you find something good, you can't tell anybody.
Well,
then it gets passed along. But the most important thing you said in that story was the worker guy there hooked you up. It's unbelievable when you go to a liquor store where there is a beer guy, and he knows what he's talking about, and he's experienced a lot of the beers. Like you go to a liquor store. Everybody can answer your questions about wine, but I can't count how many liquor stores I've gone into where I'm like, what's the difference between this beer and this beer? You know, I'm torn between what I want to buy, and they don't even know the styles, right? They're like, oh, I don't know. Like, craft beer is huge now, and you know, the volume that's moving out of the store, the price point that it's at, like, you need somebody that knows what they're doing, and they'll sell a lot of beer. I'll tell you, when I found that Epic Brewing, somebody else was buying it, and the guy was selling it to him so hard that I put whatever I had in my hand back down, and I said, where's that beer located? Because now I'm going to buy that. And I actually switched beer stores because of it. So a good beer guy, in case any package store people are listening, good beer guy is worth his weight in gold.
Oh, absolutely. And I go there so frequent enough now. His name is James. He knows my taste, and he caters his suggestions around to what my previous purchases have been.
And he even saves something when it comes in special, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the best part.
Or he lets me know early.
Yeah.
So I only have 2 more on my list because we've basically canceled a bunch out. So if you just want to do a couple more and talk about a couple more beers, I can wrap it up because I don't want to keep you too long.
Yeah, no worries. I always have fun talking about hockey and beer. If we talk a little metal, then you've hit the trifecta, and you might never get me off the podcast. But by the way, just so people know, I'm going to do a little self-promotion here. One of the things I do outside the NHL is I have a podcast myself called Metal Misconduct. It's on iTunes, and it's also the first Saturday of each month. It airs on hardradio.com, which is the biggest music internet radio station in the world. I do it with Brian Slagle, who is the president and owner and whatever else you want to call it of Metal Blade Records, which is one of the biggest heavy metal labels in North America. And you know, Brian is the guy who found Metallica before they signed. Had Slayer before they became a major label. Had the Foo Fighters before they became major label. Knows more about music than I know about hockey and beer combined, probably. But what we do on our podcast is we talk to athletes who want to be musicians, because most athletes do have some sort of musical interest, and a lot of it tends to run heavy. Or we talk to musicians who are huge sports fans. We've had, guys on to talk about baseball, hockey, UFC, all those things, and there's a lot of heavy metal hockey playing dudes. The first guest we ever had on was Drew Stafford when he was with the Sabres. That guy knows his metal like nobody's business. Robin Lehner, who we talked about a little bit, big Swedish melodic death metal guy. So we haven't had him on yet, but we're working on it. But we've had just about every heavy metal guy in the league on. So that's my podcast, and like I said, it's Metal Misconduct. And you can find it on iTunes. We've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now. So some good stuff. But another free agent guy for me would be Paul Stastny in Vegas. And I think Vegas is such an interesting story because they're not supposed to be where they are, right? And you can talk all you want about the draft being stacked. George McPhee, I was at that draft, the expansion draft. I was in Vegas for the awards in the expansion draft. And George McPhee walked away from that draft crestfallen that he thought he left a lot on the table. And he had a plan for what he wanted to do. And look, some of the guys that were really good for him, he didn't expect to have when it came to April, May, and June, right? March even, he was going to trade those guys at the trade deadline. Guys like David Perron and James Neal, who went on to sign free agent contracts. Perron signed in St. Louis, part of that bumper prop I talked about earlier, and James Neal went to Calgary on a big ticket deal. He expected to trade those guys at the deadline for more assets, and he couldn't because his team was so good. And then they get to Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final, and, they're looking at those guys leaving. Lucas Spiza left through free agency. They had some holes to fill. And then, he goes out and he gets Paul Stastny, who the Golden Knights saw more than enough of in their series in the Western Conference Final. Paul was a handful. Good two-way center. Probably by default becomes their best center. I mean, William Karlsson scored a ton of goals. I don't know if he can do that again. But Paul's better in his own end. Not that William's not good, but to me, Paul's one of the best two-way centers there are. The veteran guy who can help them kind of continue along the path they've gone and be part of that leadership group with Marc-Andre Fleury and some of the more veteran defensemen they have. I think he's going to be invaluable, and I think they're going to be good again. I don't think they're a flash in the pan. I don't see what's happened to Ottawa or any of those other teams that got really farther than expected and then came back down to earth once reality hit. I don't see that happening with them. I think they can be a legitimate contender for the Pacific Division crown, and I think that they can I don't know if they go back to the Stanley Cup Final, but I think they can put a scare into several teams in the West that have championship pedigree and championship dreams. So he really helped them not regress going into next year.
How do you think he'll fit into Gerard Gallant's system over there? Because it's pretty clear that he doesn't have the wheels like he used to, if he even ever really did. But obviously, like you said, he's more of a two-way guy. But how do you think he'll fit into that system there because that is just pure speed.
Yeah, you know what? But I think like you look at San Jose and their speed team, and Joe Thornton before he got hurt could fit in, and his wheels were not where they belong anymore. There's some guys in this league who have figured out, much like a pitcher who's lost his fastball. You know, CC Sabathia, I don't watch a lot of baseball anymore, but I've seen him pitch a couple of times this year. He's a far different pitcher than he was a couple of years ago. And you find a way to kind of do the things that you need to do. You know, Patrick Maroon more on the wing than at center. His wheels are not where they were, but he found a way to play with fast players. I think you can find a way to do it. Phil Kessel, perfect example. He's not, you know, the fastest guy I've ever seen on skates, but finds a way to get to where he needs to be dangerous. And I think for Paul, it's more he finds a way to be where he needs to be, so he's never behind the play or in front of the play, right? He's always where he needs to be in his own end, and then in the offensive end, I think his vision and the way he thinks the game, his feet don't move fast, but his head moves fast. His brain is like a supercomputer when it comes to figuring out who's where and, you know, how do I get them the puck and, you know, what's going to happen next. To me, when I watch him, he's like a chess master. He's always one or two steps ahead of, I think, where everybody else is, you know, in thinking the game. So I think that's a huge part of, you know, where he's going to help them. I don't think you'll notice that he's slower than other guys because he thinks the game so fast.
I agree. It's the classic be smarter, not, what is it? Think smarter, not work harder.
Yeah, work smarter, not harder. Yeah, exactly. You know, I think he's not going to hurt their team speed. You're not going to be like, wow, the Golden Knights really slowed down. But you're right. I don't know that he's as fast as some of the other guys they have on their team, but I don't know that they needed that. Like, I think sometimes you need a little change of pace, right? Sometimes you need somebody who's going to pull the strings back and say, okay, like, this is getting out of hand. We're going up. We're going down. Like, somebody's got to stop this. And, you know, we have a 2-goal lead, and let's shut her down and let's take the air out of this a little bit. And those are the kind of things that Paul can do. Like I said, he's a really, really smart hockey player. And look, Winnipeg, you want to talk about fast.
Oh, yeah.
Winnipeg's a fast team, and he didn't miss a beat going in there, right? I mean, he had 14 points, I think, in 19 games with the Jets, and then was, like, really good in the playoffs, like I said. So, you know, Winnipeg's speed didn't scare him at all.
I don't disagree. I completely agree with you. I'm just trying to play a little devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's the thing about any free agent signing, right? Like, you never know how it's going to work out, how the chemistry is going to be, any of those things. So you have to figure out on ice, right? And you have to see where people work. Again, going back to the Blues, like, to me, one of the most interesting things is they've added so many people, and I'm sure, you know, that they have ideas in their head. I'm sure Doug Armstrong has ideas in his head of what his top 9 looks like, and by December, it could look completely different. It could be the same 9 guys, but they're all going to be playing with somebody else, because you don't know until you put them all on ice, you know, what's going to happen and how it's all going to play out. So, you know, it's going to be interesting, and some of these moves 2 years from now, you're going to be like, that was the worst signing. You know, somebody's going to pull this podcast up and be like, wow, that Shawn Roarke kid, he doesn't know too much about hockey. These moves were a bunch of busts, but you can only go on, you know, what the track record is and what you think the chemistry is going to be.
Well, before we get into the beers, I do want to say that it's funny that you have a podcast about athletes and metal, because I've played hockey my entire life. I played all through college, play men's league now, in my mid-20s, and I actually play guitar as well. I grew up a massive metalhead, courtesy of my dad, who is one of Metallica's biggest fans. Him and I are actually going to see them in Buffalo come October, a little father-son getaway trip for a weekend, which is going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to that so much. But I actually started playing guitar when I was in 6th grade, took lessons for a year, started to get pretty good for my age. Then I made the varsity hockey team in 8th grade, so I basically gave that up pretty much until I graduated college. And in hindsight, since I never went anywhere with hockey, I sort of wish that I stuck with music, because now I'm just making up for a loss of time. And I've been playing seriously for about 3 years now, but I regret not staying with it all through high school and in playing it seriously in college. So I'm definitely gonna have to check your podcast out on that. That is something I'm really interested in.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just to go back to Drew Stafford for a minute, who is a free agent who's unsigned, and I think when training camp comes, somebody's going to be giving him a call because I think he can still help teams out. But Drew was the same way. Like, he had to make a decision when he was in high school. He was in the band, and he was obviously very good at hockey. He went to Shattuck with Sidney Crosby, and he chose hockey. And the guy who played for Brad Lukowich, who played for the Devils and won a cup with Dallas. The podcast we did with him was unbelievable because he actually talked about the famous Pantera party when the Stars won in '99 and the cup went out the window and hit the apron of the pool before it went in the pool. And that story has always lived in infamy, and Brad was able to deal a little dirt on it, but he was so good in band. He had a scholarship and gave it up to play hockey. And then while he was playing hockey during one of the lockouts, he became a music like a promoter. He signed some bands and did some stuff along those lines. So it really is unbelievable how much the two worlds coexist. And I know there's like a lot of EDM guys in the NHL. That's not really my scene. And a ton of country. Every locker room you go into, you're going to hear some country. But there's a good cadre of metal guys, and they all know each other. And so a lot of times when we have a guy, we're like, hey, who else listens to metal? And you kind of get the list, and we try and get those guys on. So there's some interesting stories about players in all sports making decisions about whether they were going to chase their athletic dreams or their music dreams. So you were not alone in having to make that decision.
I got to tell you, though, I'm not surprised. Just by even looking at Robin Leonard, I'm not surprised that he's a Swedish death metal guy. By any means at all.
He's into like In Flames and like more of the melodic death metal. And it's funny, if you don't follow metal at all, people are like, how could you say anything in death metal's melodic? But people who listen know the difference, right? Like, that's a little more palatable to a lot of people than the black metal or things like that. And I'm more into like a lot of the doom side of it. But I go all over the place. But Robin he's pretty big into like In Flames is his favorite band I've heard, and Dark Tranquility, and in bands like that a lot of that really hardcore Swedish scene that kind of came out of Gothenburg 15 years ago. So it's like, I love doing it. We do it once a month. I learned so much from the guys that we have on, and I'm always clamoring to have musicians on, but Brian spent life in the music business, and he always wants to have hockey guys on. He's a huge hockey fan, and we try and get as many on as we can. We've had a lot of writers on, Pierre LeBrun, Scott Burnside, guys like that, Arthur, and then we've gone into other sports. We've had Kyle Turley on from the NFL. We've had the UFC guy. I'm trying to think of his name now, and it's not coming to me. He might have the next championship fight. Comes out to why can't I think of his name now? But anyways, we've had a lot of different walks of life guys on. So yeah, definitely check it out.
So why don't we just go through one last beer, and then I'll let you go for the night.
All right, so before we do that, because I only got to 4, my 5th one, and I don't know if it's a good one or a bad one, but the one I'm most interested in watching is James Van Riemsdyk in Philadelphia. Going home, grew up here in New Jersey. I saw him win a state championship here. Was good with the Flyers, and then ended up going to Toronto. Toronto had no use for him because they're going in a different direction now. He goes back home to Philadelphia, where he started his career, got big money and a lot of years for a power forward. I hope he does really well. I think he's going to do well, but it's a lot of money for a long term for a guy who takes a pretty good beating, around the net and has some hard miles on him already at, 26, 27, whatever he might be. So to me, that's going to be the most interesting one. And it's what Philly always does, right? Like, they need a goalie. They've always needed a goalie, and they go out and they get another goal scorer. And so I'm kind of interested to see where they go with it this year, and I'm really interested to see how James does, back in an element that he's very familiar with. So that's the last of the hockey for me. And then the other beers I had on my list, I had 3 other beers on my list. 2 were from my travels. One was from Winnipeg. There's a brewery in Winnipeg called Half Pints, and they have a pale ale called St. James Pale Ale. And one night we were there, and nobody else was around. No writer wanted to go out, nothing. And I ended up at this little blues club in Winnipeg, off the beaten path. It was called the High and Lonesome Club. And one of the most famous Canadian blues musicians holds like an open mic night on Sunday nights. And I just stumbled into it. It was $5 Canadian to get in. Sat down, had 3 or 4 beers, and just listened to a procession of all different styles of blues players playing in a club the size of my living room and kitchen put together. It was one of the best nights I've had, and to this day, I mean, it's only been a couple of months, but I can still remember everything about it, and including, the beer that was there. And to me, that's kind of the magic of when you're enjoying beers with company or whatever, is that they become part of your memories of that event, whatever that event is. So, and that's what makes that list I do on Sirius so special, because every one of those beers I can look at and be like, oh, I was with so-and-so, and we were at this place, and that's where we had it, and this is what happened that night, or it was after this game. So they become a part of that whole palette of what your memories are. And then the other one that was from the trips this spring was the draft was in Dallas, and the last night of the draft, that Saturday, they do the draft during the day. Saturday night is like last day of school for hockey writers. We're all in the same place. We all try and go out, get some dinner, meet for drinks or whatever. There's a brewery there called Brain Dead Brewery right in Elm, Dallas. Like, it's like the Hoboken of Dallas, I guess, is the easiest way to explain it. And they had a beer there called the Sword and the Crown, which was a rye ESB, which is an unbelievable mix of styles, right? Like, I've had a lot of ESPs, but very few with rye in them. It's a big IPA thing now to have like a rye IPA. And I know there's some rye in an ESB, but this was very much to the forefront, making it like even different than the normal kind of bitter that you get. It was a completely different flavor palette. So that was pretty cool. And then the last beer I have on my list, I got to represent Rhode Island for a little bit. There's my dad, when I was a kid and he was a grown-up, he drank Narragansett beer, and it was a Rhode Island beer, and it kind of went out of style. My dad stopped drinking it, and now it's back as a craft beer, like so many other beers, like Pabst Blue Ribbon and all these other beers that they're trying to make into Ballantine, and all those beers they're trying to make into craft beers. Now, Narragansett has come back as a craft beer. And one of the summer beers they've combined with Dell's Lemonade, which is famous in Rhode Island for frozen lemonade. And they've taken their lemon concentrate and they've mixed it with the Narragansett lager to make like a lemon shandy. And we had it for 4th of July barbecue here. Comes in big tall boys, perfect summer beer. It's like 4.5%, really lemony. And you can just, you sit outside, sun's out, playing a little bit of music, having some barbecue, and perfect. It was a perfect 4th of July. So those are the other ones I have on my list.
Well, that sounds awesome. And you finished local. I'm going to finish local. My last 2 beers on my list are both from Rochester, New York. One of them being from the famous Genesee Brewery. They put out a summer beer that they actually had to rebatch because it went so quick and so fast. That this was their Ruby Red Kolsch, and it's a grapefruit summer Kolsch beer. It's like only like 5% alcohol. They go down really smooth, especially when they're cold. And Genesee, I hope you've had some Jenny beers before.
God, I went to Syracuse.
Okay, I hope so.
I've had Jenny, I've had Matt's, I've had Utica Club, and I've had OV. We used to drink the ponies of OV, the old Vienna, the 10 ounce. At Syracuse, you could get a case of them on Monday night for like $10.
That's amazing, and this Kolsch is awesome too. I've been drinking so many like heavier, darker IPAs lately that I forgot how good some of these summer light beers have been.
Yeah.
So that one was just a complete palate cleanser for me. I had it at a golf tournament about a month ago, and I've loved it ever since. And then my last one is from Three Heads Brewery. I don't know if you've had that. I know they're getting relatively big here in Western New York. I know they're distributing to both Syracuse and Buffalo. But they recently put out a New England style IPA called Strong Arm IPA, and the artwork on it's awesome. It's just a big left-handed pitcher throwing in some heat, and like we talked about earlier, New England style, that's the big trend lately, and this is like the epitome of unfiltered, hazy. It's 6.8%, and I think that's my sweet spot when it comes to IPAs, because you only need a few to start feeling a buzz, but it's enough where it won't ruin the taste or anything like that. So I highly suggest Strong Arm IPA from Three Heads if you ever make it up here or around the area.
Yeah, no, I'll have to, next time I go to Buffalo, I'll have to look for it. I love getting recommendations and finding new things. Like for me, one of the first beers I ever had that kind of got me going in this direction was we were somewhere and I had like the local beer instead of what everybody else was having, and I was like, wait, we can do this everywhere we go, and and then people are always like, how do you know where to go? I'm like, well, there's a thing called the internet, and you kind of do a little bit of research before you go, and you find out where you want to go, and you have options when you get there. So it's been a fantastic learning experience and an opportunity to meet a lot of people that think like you, or that are in business doing this, and you love to support those people because they have a passion for what they do, just like we have a passion, for what we do. So anytime I can kind of support that local economy, I'm all for it.
That's awesome. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Shawn, thank you so much for joining me on the Sticks and Beers podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure, and you are welcome to hop on the pod anytime you want. This conversation was fantastic. I appreciate it so much.
No worries. Like I said, I'm happy to do it. I don't want to overstay my welcome, but anytime you guys, feel a need, shoot me a note. We don't have to go as long. We can do it shorter, whatever. I'm always happy to talk with like-minded people. So, we can certainly make it happen again.
Awesome. You have a good night.
All right, you too, man.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Guys, it's been the Sticks and Beers podcast with your boy Bobby D. Just want to thank Shawn Roarke of NHL.com for hopping on late on a Wednesday night. That was a awesome conversation. I had so much fun talking hockey and beer. I mean, those are the two of the best things you can really do, especially since it's the summer. We don't really have any hockey to watch. We just talk off-season moves and some beers. Don't forget to check out his podcast, the Metal Misconduct Podcast. You can get it on iTunes, just like us with the Sticks and Beers podcast. Again, thank you to Coach Tony's Hot Sauce. Check them out at cthotsauce.com. Any local grocer in the Rochester, New York area. And also thank you KNRC Productions, our buddy Kendrick, for hooking us up with that sick intro, which we're going to be rocking from here on out now. Guys, hit us up at social on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Sticks and Beers Podcast. You know the drill. Sticksandbeers.com. It's been your boy Bobby D. We'll see you next time.